Well, good morning, Glue Troopers. Max here, and I just watched a video by Dr. Mark Felton on the Henschel 123, a German biplane that served the Luftwaffe from before World War II until the end of the war. And that got me to thinking about biplanes that were in service during World War II. Of course, we think World War II, we think of sleek fighters and even jets, but a lot of World War II aircraft were biplanes that served in combat. Now, of course, traditionally we think World War One when we think biplanes, but maybe the between the wars, some of the air racers and stuff. But there actually were a lot of combat World War II biplanes. And I thought we'd take a quick look at some of the kits, and it kind of dawned on me. I've actually got quite a few of them. Many of us do. For example, in America, we were still using the SOC Seagull, which I just built that ramp for, that catapult for. And that airplane was so good that it was actually brought back to replace some of the airplanes that were supposed to replace it. Although we did have biplane trainers, I'm thinking of actually combat aircraft. And we actually had a few of our own. And some of our designs that were biplanes were being used by other air forces, such as the French, into the war because, well, they had them. And we weren't the only ones. The British actually used some biplanes you don't stop to think about, like some of the old biplane airliners were brought into military service. Now, they didn't go maybe into shooting combat, but they were where the action was at. And they were being used as real military transports. But they also had planes like the Gladiator that stayed in service for quite a while and was an excellent biplane. And by early war standards, it was a pretty competent little airplane. Of course, the Russians were using quite a few biplanes. The Germans were still using the Henschel 123. And the Italians had their excellent CR-42. In fact, a box art that was on my brother's wall for a long time that I really loved was the Revell Freedom Fighters. And they had the Polycarpov and the PCL along with a Swiss CR-42, and I always loved particularly that artwork of that Swiss one with those beautiful snow-covered mountains in the background, not stopping to think about how freezing cold those poor guys must have been in an open cockpit biplane above snow-capped mountains. But that aside, I think one of the things also that made that particularly striking was that beautiful blue and yellow crown with the kind of yellowish and green camouflage, or beige and green, I'm not sure what you call that color, actually built that kit. And I just found it a very beautiful, intriguing piece of art and a very intriguing airplane. In fact, the CR-42 was flown by Bob Hoover during the war. They captured one after the Italians had surrendered, and he flew it, these I guess as a squadron hack. He loved it. He thought it was one of the greatest flying airplanes he'd ever flown. The Italians always had a reputation for building airplanes like with a certain panache and sportsmanship to them, which is not surprising if you look at some of the Italian sports cars. I just hope they weren't as high maintenance. The Japanese were still using quite a few combat reconnaissance aircraft biplanes. I actually have an E-11 Laura, and they had the Mitsubishi Pete and the E-8N Dave and quite a few others. Actually, they even had some small production run airplanes that were being used as reconnaissance or bombers. So they had quite the little selection of biplanes that they used throughout the entire war, especially the Pete, which being a Mitsubishi was surprisingly fast for a biplane. Of course, I mentioned the Gloucester Gladiator, which was a very competent biplane fighter, but let's face it, probably the most famous British biplane in World War II has got to be the Swordfish. I mean, it did such a good job that even during the war they tried to make basically a upgraded version, the Albacore, but my understanding is it was never as popular as the Swordfish. I guess what I wanted to bring up is that biplanes make a very interesting World War II subject as well as a World War I subject. And the biplanes came into their total maturity by the end of World War II. Of course, propellers had pretty much reached their zenith by then. The jets were coming in. But I just thought it was kind of interesting. It's a subject you don't think much about. And some of the biplanes, like the Henschel 123, which was replaced by the Stuka, but the airplane was so good at what it did, they tried to keep it in service until the end of the war. And of course, the SOC Seagull. Some of these planes were just so good that they stayed in as a respectable, solid piece of military hardware until after the war. I just thought that was kind of cool. It's an interesting subject matter to model. And one of the nice things about the later biplanes is there's rigging on them. But that was just my subject for this morning. So, what interwar or World War II biplanes have you built models of, or would you be interested in doing it? And as for me, well, guys, I build everything. So, um, that was just kind of the thought I had for this morning. Thought I would chat about it. Hope everybody's doing well. Take care of yourselves. And as always, model on.